Deep in the humid backwoods of Louisiana, there stands a mansion that time forgot, the Whitmore Estate. For over a century and a half, its windows have remained dark, its grand halls silent. But in 1897, when local authorities finally forced their way inside, they discovered something that would haunt the region for generations. 7 bedrooms on the second floor, each one perfectly preserved, each one decorated for a little girl. Dolls arranged on shelves, tiny dresses laid out on miniature beds, tea sets waiting for guests who would never arrive. But here's what made investigators' blood run cold. These rooms hadn't been touched since the 1860s, and the 7 sisters who once lived in them had never been allowed to grow up. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is the documented truth about one of the most disturbing family secrets from the era of American slavery. A story of obsession, medical malpractice, and the witnesses who couldn't speak. Before we begin, I need to know, what do you think happened in that house? Share your theories in the comments, because the truth is far more sinister than you can imagine. The year is 1850. Evergreen Plantation sprawls across 3,000 acres of fertile Louisiana soil along the Mississippi River. Sugar-cane fields stretch to the horizon, worked by over 200 enslaved people who toil from dawn until well past dusk. At the heart of this empire stands the Whitmore Mansion, a Greek Revival masterpiece with towering white columns, wraparound galleries, and floor-to-ceiling windows designed to catch the slightest breeze in the suffocating southern heat. Jonathan Whitmore built this house with money inherited from his father's shipping business. But it was the sugar trade, the brutal, back-breaking sugar trade, that made him one of the wealthiest men in the parish. He married Catherine Beaumont in 1842. She was the daughter of a Charleston aristocrat, educated in Paris, accomplished in piano and French. By all accounts, she was the perfect Southern belle. Their first daughter, Margaret, was born in 1843. Then came Elizabeth in 1844. Then Caroline, Virginia, Louisa, Emily, and finally little Abigail in 1850. 7 daughters in 7 years. The neighbors whispered. They said Catherine looked exhausted. They said Jonathan wanted a son. They said the constant pregnancies had damaged her mind. But what no one said, at least not publicly, was what happened after each girl turned 7 years old. It started with Margaret. On her 7th birthday in 1850, the Whitmores threw an elaborate party. Musicians played. Tables overflowed with cake and sweets. The entire plantation community, at least the white families, attended. But after that day, little Margaret was never seen outside the house again. When neighbors asked about her, Catherine would smile that distant, peculiar smile and say Margaret was delicate. She needed special care. She was being educated at home. The same thing happened to Elizabeth the following year, then Caroline, then Virginia. One by one, each Whitmore daughter disappeared from public view the moment she turned 7. By 1857, all 7 girls were confined to the second floor of the mansion. The enslaved houseworkers knew something terrible was happening, but in that world, in that time, their voices meant nothing. One woman, though, saw everything. Her name was Rose. The Whitmores called her Mammy Rose, a title of false affection that masked her complete powerlessness. She had been purchased specifically to care for the Whitmore children, and what she witnessed in that house would eventually become the only written testimony of what really happened to those 7 sisters. Rose kept a secret diary hidden in the walls of her cabin. She wrote by candlelight in careful script she had taught herself, despite laws forbidding enslaved people from learning to read or write. Her words, discovered decades later, tell a story that official records tried to erase. Let me read you Rose's own words, written in September of 1857. Miss Catherine has done it again. Little Louisa turned 7 today. The party was beautiful. Miss Catherine wore her finest silk. Master Jonathan smiled for the guests, but I saw it in Miss Catherine's eyes, that look, the same look she had with all the others. After the guests left, Miss Catherine took Louisa upstairs. She was carrying a new porcelain doll. This one had Louisa's exact face, her exact hair color, her exact blue eyes. Miss Catherine commissioned it months ago from that doll maker in New Orleans. She does this for each girl. When they come back down, they're different. Different how? Rose describes a transformation that happened to each sister. After their 7th birthday, the girls became quiet, lethargic. They stopped running, stopped laughing. They would sit in their rooms, holding their porcelain dolls, staring out the windows with glassy eyes. Catherine would dress them in matching outfits with their dolls. She would arrange elaborate tea parties where the girls barely spoke. She would read to them for hours while they sat motionless, like the porcelain figures they clutched. The Whitmore mansion operated on a strict schedule. Every morning at 8, Rose would bring breakfast to the 2nd floor. 7 trays, 7 identical meals. She would find the girls already dressed, sitting on their beds, waiting. They never asked to go outside. They never asked to see friends. When Rose tried to engage them, tried to make them smile, they would respond in slow, dreamy voices, as if speaking from underwater. Catherine monitored everything. She had a bedroom connected to all 7 daughters' rooms through a series of doors. She could move between them constantly, checking, adjusting, controlling. She would spend hours brushing their hair, counting the strokes. 100 strokes each night. She would inspect their clothes for any sign of dirt or wear. She would measure them obsessively, recording their heights and weights in a leather-bound journal. And here's what Rose noticed. The girls weren't growing. Margaret should have been 14 by 1857, but she looked barely 9. Elizabeth should have been 13, but she could have passed for 8. It was unnatural. It was impossible. But it was happening. Rose writes, "I don't understand what Miss Catherine is doing, but these children are not right. Their eyes are empty, their movements are slow. Sometimes I hear them crying at night, soft whimpering like wounded animals. But by morning they are quiet again, sitting with their dolls, waiting for their mother." The truth was hidden in plain sight. Every week, a carriage would arrive at the plantation. The driver would deliver packages to the house, medical supplies, bottles with handwritten labels, powders and tinctures, and once a month a man would visit, Dr. Heinrich Vogel. He was a German immigrant who had settled in New Orleans in the 1840s. He claimed expertise in childhood development and nervous disorders. But his real expertise was in keeping secrets for wealthy families willing to pay. Jonathan Whitmore paid him very well. So, let me ask you something. Based on what you've heard so far, what do you think was in those bottles? What was Dr. Vogel giving to those little girls? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because what we uncover next reveals a level of medical abuse that is almost impossible to comprehend. Thank you so much for staying with this story. I know it's difficult to hear, but the truth matters, and what happens next, as disturbing as it is, needs to be told. In 1942, during renovation work on what remained of the Whitmore mansion, construction workers made a discovery in the cellar. Hidden behind a false wall, they found Dr. Vogel's medical records, detailed notes spanning from 1850 to 1863. What those records revealed was a systematic program of chemical child abuse disguised as medical treatment. Dr. Vogel's notes are clinical, detached, horrifying. He documents administering a combination of substances to the Whitmore daughters: laudanum, which is opium dissolved in alcohol; arsenic in small, carefully measured doses; chloral hydrate, a sedative so powerful it was later used as a knockout drug; and various herbal compounds designed to suppress physical development. His stated goal, written in his own hand, was to maintain the children in a state of arrested development. Catherine Whitmore had convinced herself that her daughters would die if they reached womanhood. She had lost her own mother to childbirth complications. She had seen friends die in labor, and in her deteriorating mental state, she believed that keeping her daughters as eternal children was the only way to save them. Jonathan Whitmore knew. The records make that clear. He paid Dr. Vogel substantial sums. He ordered the medications. He enforced the isolation. Whether he truly believed in his wife's delusion or simply enabled it to avoid confrontation, we'll never know. But he was complicit. Every single day, Rose was ordered to mix the medications into the girls' food and drinks. She had no choice. Refusing would have meant severe punishment, possibly sale away from the plantation, separation from her own children who were also enslaved there. So she followed orders, and it tortured her. She writes, "I am poisoning these babies. I put the powders in their morning chocolate. I watch their eyes grow dim. I watch them fade. Miss Margaret clutches her stomach sometimes. Miss Caroline has sores in her mouth. Little Abigail cries that her head hurts, but I cannot stop. God forgive me, I cannot stop. The physical effects were devastating. The arsenic caused chronic stomach pain, skin lesions, and neurological damage. The opiates created dependency and cognitive impairment. The growth-suppressing compounds disrupted their hormonal development, keeping their bodies childlike while their minds remained partially aware, trapped in a nightmare they couldn't articulate. By 1860, 3 of the 7 sisters had died. Margaret succumbed first in 1859 at age 16. Her body was that of a 10-year-old. The official cause of death listed on parish records was typhoid fever. A lie. Caroline died 6 months later. Then Louisa in early 1861. But here's where the story becomes even more macabre. Catherine refused to accept their deaths. She insisted the girls were merely sleeping. She had their bodies dressed in their finest clothes and photographed, a common Victorian practice called post-mortem photography. But Catherine took it further. She kept the photographs in the girls' rooms. She continued to set places for them at meals. She spoke to them as if they were still alive. Rose documents this descent into complete madness. Miss Catherine has lost her mind entirely. She talks to the dead girls. She brushes hair that isn't there. Master Jonathan says nothing. He drinks his whiskey and pretends not to see. The 4 girls who remain are like ghosts themselves. They know their sisters are gone, but they cannot speak of it. They cannot speak of anything anymore. The house became a tomb for the living and the dead. The remaining sisters, Elizabeth, Virginia, Emily, and Abigail, existed in a twilight state between consciousness and oblivion. They were children in body, teenagers in years, but neither in mind. The medications had stolen their development, their potential, their very selves. But Rose was not alone in bearing witness. There were others, enslaved people who worked in that house and on that plantation who saw everything, and they found ways to resist, even when resistance seemed impossible. There was Benjamin, the house butler, who began documenting Jonathan Whitmore's financial records, noting every payment to Dr. Vogel. There was Clara, the seamstress, who kept the tiny dresses that no longer fit the girls. Evidence that they had once been growing normally. There was Samuel, who worked in the stables, who noticed that Dr. Vogel's carriage visits became more frequent as the girls' health declined. These people created a network of silent resistance. They couldn't stop what was happening. Speaking out would have meant death. But they could document, they could preserve evidence, they could bear witness. And they did so knowing that justice might never come in their lifetimes, but hoping that someday, somehow, the truth would be known. Rose's diary entries from 1861 reveal the psychological toll of forced complicity. I pray every night that God will forgive me. I am a mother myself. My own children sleep in the quarters, and I am grateful they are field workers, not houseworkers, because they do not have to see what I see. I think about running, taking my babies and running north. But the patrols would catch us. They always do. So I stay, and I watch these white children suffer, and I suffer with them, because suffering knows no color when you are powerless. The Civil War brought chaos to Louisiana. By 1863, Union forces were advancing. The plantation economy was collapsing. Enslaved people were fleeing to Union lines. Jonathan Whitmore, facing financial ruin and social upheaval, made a decision. He sent Dr. Vogel away. He stopped the medications. Perhaps he thought the girls would recover. Perhaps he simply no longer cared. The result was catastrophic. After years of chemical dependency, stopping abruptly sent the 4 surviving sisters into withdrawal. Elizabeth, the eldest survivor, began having seizures. Virginia couldn't eat without vomiting. Emily developed tremors so severe she couldn't hold a cup. Little Abigail, who had been on the medication since age 7, screamed for days, her body in agony as it tried to adjust to functioning without the drugs. Rose stayed with them through it all, even as the plantation descended into chaos, even as the old order collapsed around them. She remained in that house, caring for the girls, not because she was forced to anymore. The war had changed that, but because no one else would. No one else could look at what these children had become and not turn away in horror or pity. When Union soldiers arrived at Evergreen Plantation in April of 1864, they found Jonathan Whitmore dead, likely by his own hand. They found Catherine locked in her bedroom, completely detached from reality, singing lullabies to empty rooms. And they found the 4 sisters. Elizabeth was 21, but looked 12. Virginia was 19, but looked 10. Emily was 17, but looked 9. Abigail was 14, but looked 7. The soldiers didn't know what to make of them. The girls couldn't explain what had happened. Years of chemical alteration had damaged their ability to communicate coherently. They spoke in fragments. They clung to their porcelain dolls. They asked for their mother. Rose tried to explain. But who would believe such a story? Who could comprehend that parents would do this to their own children? The official report filed by the Union commander mentioned finding several mentally deficient young women in a state of severe neglect. That was all. No investigation, no justice. Just another tragedy in a landscape full of them. The aftermath of the Whitmore family's collapse is a story of profound tragedy and missed opportunities for justice. Catherine Whitmore was committed to an asylum in New Orleans, where she died in 1867, still believing her daughters were 7 years old and waiting for her at home. The 4 surviving sisters were placed in the care of distant relatives who had no idea how to help them. They tried, they genuinely tried, but the damage was irreversible. Elizabeth lived until 1873. She never grew taller than 4 feet 9 inches. Her organs had been so damaged by years of arsenic exposure that they simply gave out. She was 30 years old. Virginia made it to 1876. She never learned to read beyond a child's level. The cognitive damage was too severe. She was 32. Emily survived the longest of the 3. She lived until 1884, reaching her 40th birthday. But she looked like a teenager her entire adult life. Her body never fully matured. She never menstruated. She never developed beyond early pubescence. The medications had stolen her future in the most fundamental biological sense. She died alone in a boarding house in Baton Rouge, still clutching a porcelain doll. Abigail's fate is the most mysterious. Records show she was alive in 1878, living with a cousin's family in Mobile, Alabama. But after that, she disappears from all documentation. Some historians believe she died and was buried in an unmarked grave. Others think she might have been institutionalized under a different name. We simply don't know. The Whitmore mansion stood empty for decades. Local people avoided it. Children dared each other to approach the gates, but never went further. Stories circulated about ghosts, about the sounds of children crying, about lights in the windows. In 1897, the property was sold for taxes. The new owners found the house exactly as it had been left. The 7 bedrooms on the second floor remained untouched. Each room was a shrine to a childhood that never ended. Dolls arranged on shelves, tiny clothes in wardrobes, books opened to pages that would never be turned, tea sets waiting for parties that would never happen. The new owners, disturbed by what they found, cleared out the rooms and burned most of the contents, a decision made out of discomfort that destroyed historical evidence. But they couldn't erase what happened there. What about Rose? Her story has the only ending that contains any measure of dignity. After the war, she stayed in Louisiana. She found her children, who had been scattered to different plantations when they were sold. She reunited her family. She worked as a laundress and saved every penny, and she wrote. She continued her diary until her death in 1891. Her writings, discovered in the 1930s during a WPA oral history project, provide the most detailed account of life inside the Whitmore mansion. Her final entry, written shortly before she died, reads, "I am an old woman now. My hair is white. My hands are bent with arthritis, but I remember those girls every day. I remember Margaret's smile before the medicine stole it. I remember Elizabeth's questions before her mind grew cloudy. I remember all of them as they should have been. Free, growing, living. I could not save them, I could not stop it, but I could witness, I could remember, and now I have written it down, so that someday someone will know what happened in that house. Someone will know their names. Someone will know they were real children who deserved to grow up." The Whitmore mansion was demolished in 1923. A shopping centre stands there now. Most people who park their cars and buy their groceries have no idea what once happened on that ground. But the story survived. In archives and historical societies, in academic papers and local history books, the truth of the Whitmore sisters has been preserved. This story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the complete disregard for human life that characterized the era of slavery. The Whitmore sisters suffered because their mother was mentally ill, and their father was too cowardly to stop her. But that abuse was only possible because of a system that gave white property owners absolute power over everyone in their household. The enslaved people who witnessed this horror were forced to participate in it. Rose had to administer poison to children while her own children's lives hung in the balance based on the whims of their enslavers. The medical establishment enabled it. Dr. Vogel faced no consequences. The legal system ignored it. No one was ever charged. No one was ever held accountable. And the victims, both the sisters who died slowly and the witnesses who were forced to watch, were forgotten by official history, until people like Rose made sure they weren't. So I ask you now, what do you think about this story? About a family that had everything, wealth and status and power, and used it to destroy their own children? About a system so fundamentally broken that such atrocities could happen behind closed doors with no intervention? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story affected you, if you believe these voices from the past deserve to be heard, please subscribe to this channel. We uncover the stories that history tried to bury. The truth matters. These lives mattered, and remembering them is the only justice we can offer now. Click on the next recommended video to discover another historical mystery that challenges everything you thought you knew about the past. The truth is always more complex than we imagine, and it's always worth uncovering.